In the previous lessons, we learned how to solve quadratic equations. But the quadratic equations that we learned how to solve were those of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And we learned two ways of solving them. We learned the factorization method, and we learned how to solve them using the quadratic formula. For the factorization method, because we haven't yet learned how to factorize quadratics of the form ax squared plus bx plus c when a is not equal to 1, we only solved quadratic equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 when a is equal to 1. For example, x squared plus 6x plus 8 is equal to 0. So a here is equal to 1. Now, we said that the factorization method only works when the quadratic part is factorable. When it's not factorable, the factorization method does not work. And that was why we learned how to use the quadratic formula. And we also said that the quadratic formula works for whatever kind of quadratic equation you have. So we tried solving quadratic equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c when a is equal to 1 or when a is not equal to 1. It always works. Today, we are going to learn how to solve quadratic equations of a slightly different form. The form that we are going to deal with, to talk about, are those quadratic equations with the form ax squared plus bx is equal to 0. So no c here, unlike the previous ones. An example of this kind of quadratic is this, 2x squared plus 6x is equal to 0, in which case our a is 2, our b is 6. Both the factorization method and the quadratic formula works here, but I think that this is easier. This kind of quadratic is easier to solve using the factorization method, but we are going to show both ways, and let's see for ourselves. Let's do the factorization method first. And for this kind of quadratic, the kind of factorization that we'll apply here is the common monomial factoring. So when we take out the common monomial factoring, we look at, let's start with the coefficients. The coefficients 2 and 6. The common factor of 2 and 6 will be the biggest number. The greatest common factor of 2 and 6 would be 2. And for the variable part, x squared and x. So in the first term, you have 2 x's. In the second term, you have 1x. So 1x is common to both. So if you remember this method from before, the next step will now be to divide each term by the common factor, starting with 2x squared divided by 2x. So 2x squared divided by 2x. The 2 will cancel out here, and x squared divided by x to the power of 1 is just x. So we have x here. Then let's divide 6x divided by the common factor 2x. X cancels out, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So we have a 3 here. And because this is a plus sign over here, it means that we are going to have a plus sign here. And then let's just copy the x is equal to 0. So what we now have are two numbers, 2x, and x plus 3, two numbers multiplied together and gives 0. So we can now apply here the zero product property or the null factor law. And that allows us to write this equation into two simple linear equations, 2x equals 0 or x plus 3 equals 0. And to solve these two simpler equations, the first one will just be divided by 2, 2 cancels out, x equals 0. That is one solution. And for this second linear equation, minus 3 on both sides, then we get this cancels out, and we get x is equal to negative 3 or minus 3. And that is the other solution. Now, let's see how it goes if we use the quadratic formula. So you have 2x squared plus 6x is equal to 0. So now let's first identify your a, b, and c for the quadratic formula. So our a here is 2. It's this one. Our b is 6, the number in front of x, or the coefficient of x. And because we don't have a c, c will be 0. And for the quadratic formula, x is equal to, let's write down the quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And substituting the values of the coefficients, we get b is 6, so negative b will be negative 6 plus minus square root of b squared would be 6 squared minus 4 times a is 2, and c is 0 divided by 2 times 2. Let's simplify. So negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared is 36. And that's minus 4 times 2 times 0 is just 0 divided by 4. Right, I'm running out of space here, so I'm going to erase these ones over here for now. And let's copy. I'm going to rewrite here on top. Negative 6 plus minus square root of 36 minus 0 is just 36 divided by 4. So now we have negative 6 plus minus the square root of 36 is just 6 divided by 4. That's our x. Then we break it down into two equations, simpler equations. Negative 6 plus 6 divided by 4. And the other one is x equals negative 6 minus 6 divided by 4. Now this gives you negative 6 plus 6 is 0, and 0 divided by 4 is 0. This is this answer. And this other one is negative 6 minus 6 is negative 12, divided by 4 is negative 3, which is the same as this answer. So I think what we see here, it's clear that the quadratic formula takes a much longer time. It takes a lot more steps than the factorization method. So in this next example, let's use the factorization method. So we have 3x squared minus 12x is equal to 0. So again, the kind of factorization technique that will work here is the common monomial factoring. Let's get the greatest common factor. Let's start with the coefficients, 3 and 12. The greatest common factor of 3 and 12 would be 3. And for the x's, we have two x's here and one x here, so one x is common. So that's our common monomial factor. Let's now divide each term by the common factor. So that's 3x squared divided by 3x. Let's write that down here. 3x squared divided by 3x. 3 cancels out, and x squared divided by x to the power of 1, or x squared divided by x is just x. Let's write our answer here. And next would be 12x divided by 3x. 12x divided by 3x. X cancels out, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So let's write that down here. And because we have a minus sign here, let's also have a minus sign in between. Let's carry out 0. The next step would be just to apply the null factor law. So we have 3x times x minus 4 equals 0. So either 3x equals 0 or x minus 4 equals 0. Solve each equation. The first one would be 3x equals 0. Divide both sides by 3. 3 cancels out. X equals 0 divided by 3, which is just 0. That is one solution. The second equation, x minus 4 equals 0, plus 4 on both sides. So this cancels out, and you get x is equal to 0 plus 4, which is just 4. So your solutions are x equals 0 and x equals 4. Next example, 6x squared plus 5x equals 0. All right, let's get the common factor. Let's start with 6 and 5. Do they have a common factor? No, they don't. So let's move on to x squared and x. So 1x is common. So take that out here. So our only common factor here is x. Now let's divide 6x squared by x. 6x squared divided by x. So the only thing that we can do here is 6 will still be here because that's like 6 divided by 1. And then x squared divided by x to the power of 1 will just be x. So the answer here is 6x. Then next, 5x divided by x. 5x divided by x. X cancels out, so we are left with 5. So we put 5 here because that's a plus sign in between. We will have a plus sign in between. That's equal to 0. Then we do the null factor law. So x equals 0 or 6x plus 5 equals 0. For the first equation, x equals 0, you can't do anything about it. That's actually already the solution. The second equation is a two-step one. So let's minus 5 from both sides first. So we get 6x. This cancels out. We get 6x is equal to 0 minus 5 is negative 5. Then we divide both sides by 6. This cancels out, and we get x is equal to negative 5 over 6, which is already a fraction in simplest form. So you can keep it that way. So that's the other solution. So the two solutions of this quadratic equation are x equals 0 and x equals negative 5 over 6. Next example, x squared plus x equals 3x. Now, remember that one of the things that we need to do before solving a quadratic equation is to write it in standard form. And by that, we mean that make one side of the equation equal to 0. So the first thing that we need to do here is to get rid of 3x from the right-hand side. One of the ways we can do it is to minus 3x from both sides of the equation. So this will give us x squared. X minus 3x is negative 2x. Then 3x minus 3x is just 0. Then we go ahead and factorize. So x squared and x, common factor is x. Let's divide x squared divided by x. That would be x. And 2x divided by x, that will just be 2. And then we have a minus sign here, so let's put a minus sign here between x and 2. Make that equal to 0. Apply the null factor law, so it means that x equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. X equals 0, that's already the answer. It's already one solution. For the second one, x minus 2 equals 0 plus 2 on both sides. We get x equals 2. So the two solutions are x equals 0 and x equals 2.